everyone. All right, so our panel is how to find, hook, and bedazzle your audience, and the goal of this panel is really to show you how to build an audience, because you might have the best podcast or the best episode or that perfect radio audio moment, but if nobody knows how to find you, or if people don't stick around long enough to get to that really good stuff, then all of your hard work is just sitting online, not being listened to. I'm Sarah Gonzalez. I'm a reporter at WNYC in New York City, and our panelists up here today know all about how to find and develop audiences and keep them coming back, including when you don't have any money to spend on ads, and they're gonna share all their tips with us. To start us off, I will just admit that I don't think the podcasting world has done a very good job of attracting me. I think that I think that part of it is definitely because I don't hear from enough people who look like me or my family, or I don't hear the issues or people talked about in a way that makes me want to keep listening. I am a news person. I work at a place where I am surrounded by podcasts. I appreciate good radio and good podcasts and production value and good storytelling. And even though I think that there are funny and entertaining and smart podcasts out there that are made by women, when it comes to the people who are telling other people's stories, which I as a reporter care about, I feel like men are the ones that get to tell other people's stories, usually white men or white women, and even a lot of the podcasts that have diverse hosts have teams behind them that are not diverse at all, and I feel like I can hear it. So that is my frustration with the podcasting world, but also, the podcasts don't find me. Like, they don't reach me in my world, in my circles, in my friend groups. I'm not discovering a lot of the really good podcasts that are out there, and that's one of the biggest challenges with the podcasting world is just discovery, like finding out the new podcasts. But our panelists have done a remarkably impressive job at finding new audiences and maintaining relevance when there's so much competing for our ears. So, Ashley Alvarado, over there, is the manager of public engagement at the public radio station KPCC here in Los Angeles. And KPCC has worked really hard to grow their Latino audience, and they did it. So Rebecca Lehrer is co-host and co-creator of the podcast called The Mashup Americans. The Mashup Americans is a media company dealing with race, identity, and culture and what it means to be American today. And Rebecca was previously the director of business development at New York Public Radio, where I'm at. And in the middle, we have Christina Rentz. She is the label manager and director of publicity at an indie music label called Merge Records. And they have done a really great job of competing with the big music labels and maintaining relevance. And for those of you who, like me, might not immediately see the connection between the podcasting world and the music industry, I learned from Christina that there are actually a lot of overlaps, and we share a lot of the same challenges when it comes to like having a complicated distribution, for example. So Christina, just to start us off, why don't you just draw that connection for us about how the music industry and the podcasting world can learn from each other?
Hi. Well, I'm really excited to be here, and obviously really good at talking myself into rooms like this. Despite it does seem a little weird, but we, as an independent record label, we have a lot of the same challenges with limited resources, but we also have a ton of passionate fans who want to help us build communities. And I think podcasting does a really good job. I mean, I know you're talking about the challenges of diversity, but I think that podcasting does a really good job of amplifying and reaching underrepresented audiences, and independent record labels, we struggle with that. So, but I think the number one thing we're all trying to do is get invited into your ears. So that's the main thing we have in common.
And before we let people into our ears, I guess, we need to know before we get our audience to trust us, we need to know who our audience is, and make sure that we're giving them what they're coming to us for. And so the first step to growing your audience is really knowing who your audience is and where to find them. So Rebecca and the Mashup Americans know very well who their audience is. Rebecca says it's 25 to 40-year-old women who are mashups. So Rebecca, why don't you give us some examples of how knowing who your audience is impacts how you write your show and what information you give them and how you interact with them?
Right. So just to be clear, I fall in that range of mashup women. So basically, me and my co-host Amy Choi, who's a Korean American woman in her 30s. I won't say exactly where in her 30s. And I am a Salvadoran Jewish American, also in my 30s. And we are the audience. So we know who we are. We talk like ourselves. We kind of, it informs what we care about, what the questions we ask, who we have on as guests, and what we assume that people know. And I think that people appreciate that we kind of assume sort of a shared culture or a shared curiosity, at least. We also mix high and low because that's who we all are. We care about academic things, we care about the news, we also care about, gossip and Hollywood and all sorts of other silly things, and we are capable of being whole and being able to hold all of those things. So I think that's the critical piece, is speaking like ourselves. Like we don't have to pretend or put on voices. Actually, just this week we were doing something too scripted, and we were like, gotta go. Like we just don't sound like we sound like the fake version or somebody programmed us.
And one of the things you also do is cross-promotion, and you support other podcasts, right? I think you have a story.
Oh, yeah, so we have, I think there's a lot of this, which is the critical piece, and I think that's a lot of the relationship. I know that a few of you who work at WNYC, that's sort of the origin of WNYC Studios, is kind of the independent record label model, and thinking about how do you connect the dots, how are you the curator, and how do you think about how what you're doing relates to other people. It's a small world, and we can all support each other, and we're all women, and we should all raise each other up. So let's say another round, which I'm sure you guys are all huge fans of, and I hopefully are seeing tonight here live. They had on Lin-Manuel Miranda, and this was last year, and they talked about, he talked about his favorite movie being La Bamba, and I was listening to it, and I'm like, obviously, that's my favorite movie, and Lou Diamond Phillips won the Mashup Oscar Award from us for Lifetime Achievement. Also, FYI, he's not Latino, it's another thing I want to talk about with all of you later, but he won honorary Latino from us. So he's the best, and so I was listening, and I was like, I was surprised that Tracy in Heaven didn't call that out, but I also made sense. And so we just tweeted at them because we understood, A, our audiences have overlap, B, wow, I bet you Lin-Manuel and Lou Diamond Phillips would have something. And then this sort of tweet love fest started. And I think that was just like knowing that we could curate and be related and it's all connected in felt really important. And then I don't know if you can read it. I probably couldn't. I can't read it from there. But essentially they were like, we need each other. Oh my God, you opened the door and I'm here and we're here together. And it just felt like there's an opportunity to raise each other up and understand who else is out there. And it's not just piggybacking, but it's supporting each other as well.
Okay. And Ashley, as someone who is in public radio, how do you reach audiences with little to no money?
Sorry.
Very much the case. And I would say that I spend as little time as possible behind a microphone or on stage, especially with my lovely cold right now. But I am very much a believer in engagement outside of our building, which requires engagement inside our building. So one of the things that I did, because community and audience are not necessarily the same thing, it's really important to remember that, is I spent a lot of time going into community. I worked with our underwriting team, for example, to start a series called Feeding the Conversation. And that's where we're working with community members, people that were already sort of inside of our engagement network, to invite folks in and just have our journalists listen and get to know what are those things going on, and building interest and investment that way. We paired one with so we did this listening session and conversation with community members, and it was so great because people were like, okay, you care as much about what we think as you want us to care about what you think. And at one of these, we actually had a gentleman go, okay, I've got my checkbook. Like, who do I write a check to make sure this podcast happens? And so that's a critical part of it. And then, when it comes to engagement generally, building audience, building loyalty, I always talk about being in the preferred physical space, the preferred platform for social media or live, whatever, and the preferred language. And that could mean that you're just being yourself. It could mean that sometimes you have to go into a different spoken language, and that can be free or really expensive, but it could be free.
And you're going to them when you talk about being in the physical space with them.
Oh yeah, I mean, we need to get over ourselves and go to where the people we're trying to engage are.
Okay. Christina, you used to be in commercial radio, and you told me that commercial radio markets to women in really gross ways, and that there is really no great way to reach women. So how and where do you reach women?
I got out of commercial radio really quickly, just to be clear. We struggle with that a lot. You ladies are hard to find, and I feel like as a lady, I'm like, where am I? Like, why is it so hard to reach me? A lot of it is, we do well with non-commercial radio or like a AAA format, and that is traditionally male-dominated music-wise. So one thing we've been trying to do is just sign more women, get more women artists, and find out where their audience is and try to be there. We have some odd challenges with that sometimes. We had an artist get hot new artists in Entertainment Weekly, and Entertainment Weekly makes you say how old you are, and she was so stressed out because she was 44 and she was worried that they would kill the story. We had another artist, Waxahachie, who you guys may have heard of. She's Katie Crutchfield. And Lena Dunham asked her to go on this Lenny tour that was like 4 dates, and they were going to give all the proceeds to local LGBTQ charities. And her Facebook exploded with people just like tearing her apart. And there were men tearing her apart over this. And everybody was coming from a good place, but it's just like people have these really polarizing views of what women can be. And so it's really hard to put yourself out there when that's going to happen to you,
You did have, you told me about a successful event you had with a group called Lamb Chop.
Yeah, so the point of the Lamb Chop story was more about like you were saying about like being in the space where engaging with people directly and being ready for magic to happen. And I think we have a festival where we throw ourselves a party every 5 years for our birthday. And at our 20th birthday, a band that we'd been working with for 20 years just were the most impressed. They just had this amazing show. And we were all in the room when this like magic happened, and we were recording it. And so instead of being like, wow, you had to be one of the 500 people in this room, we released it. And it started a renaissance in this band's career after 20 years, which is really hard to do. And I think you have to be willing to jump on moments like that and be aware that magic happens in the room, and just be ready to jump all over it and advance your audience that way.
Okay. Examples of successes are great, but we also want to share some less successful attempts at bedazzling your audience. And Rebecca is going to share a story with us about a podcast moment that maybe didn't bedazzle as much as it could have. Rebecca, we're going to play the clip, but set it up for us.
Wait, to be fair, I have a lot of failed moments. I actually don't think this is a failure. I just think that you'll see, basically, our first episode was about the mashup life of Donald Trump. And this was in November of 2015. Needless to say, we thought it would be outdated by the time it came out, and we were wrong, sadly. So we talked to his biographer and he told us about that his immigrant name was Drumpf. So I guess we can play it, and I can tell you a little bit about what I learned from this.
Right, so this is how Mashup Americans revealed Trump's name before, or his family's original name, before any of us had really heard it.
This was a dream of a young man who came to America and found opportunity and didn't become a U.S. citizen until he returned to Seattle, and I found his citizenship papers, and at the time his name was not Trump, but Drumpf.
Drumpf.
D-R-U-M-P-F. And, gradually the letters of the name changed and they became Trump. And there's an immigration, ethnicity story?
So I think there are definitely like good instincts there. You hear the host step in, repeat the name Drumpf in like, she says it slowly in this kind of weird way, so it sticks out to us. It's the first time we're hearing it, which is great. That's how you handle it. But then this is how John Oliver told that same story months later.
It was months later, but pretty sure you learned about Trump from him and not from me. That's the failure.
Trump does sound rich. It's almost onomatopoeic. Trump. It's the sound produced when a mouthy servant is slapped across the face with a wad of $1,000 bills. Trump. It's the sound of a cork popping on a couple's champagne anniversary, the date renovations in the wine cellar were finally completed. The very name Trump is the cornerstone of his brand. If only there were a way to uncouple that magical word from the man he really is. Well, guess what? There is. Because it turns out the name Trump was not always his family's name. One biographer found that a prescient ancestor had changed it from, and this is true, Drumpf. Yes, King Drumpf. And Drumpf is much less magical. It's the sound produced when a morbidly obese pigeon flies into the window of a foreclosed Old Navy. Drumpf. It's the sound of a bottle of store-brand root beer falling off the shelf in a gas station mini-mart. And it may seem weird to bring up his ancestral name, but to quote Donald Trump, he should be proud of his heritage. Because Drumpf is much more reflective of who he actually is.
Okay. So, I mean, a lot of the same techniques here, though.
Yeah,
Where you're talking about the way, where you're talking, there's moments where you're talking about how the word Trump sounds.
Yeah, we're talking about his immigrant heritage, what it means, why he can't have any empathy and has no soul. You know, but the problem is, I think it is hard to understand contextually, and then you watch this happen, and we can, the plus side is we know we're, have our finger on the pulse of something good. The downside is, does it matter if nobody knew that you did it, right? So that happens a lot, right? We'll have a really great idea, and we'll go ahead with it, and then we watch somebody do it really successfully 4 to 6 months later. So, I mean, there's one part which is like, yes, we know we are ahead of the curve, and the other part is, maybe we're not doing it right.
I mean, it's true, though, that the people who did listen to your podcast was like, oh, they did it first, and we know this.
Those people who listened to the first podcast did know first. So I recommend you all subscribe to my podcast, and you'll know something first.
But the point is that I imagine it sets, you know, it makes you more credit. Like they're like, oh, wow, they did this thing, and that's a way to grow your audience.
I think that's true. I hope that that's true.
And you talk about creating this like shared language with your audience and creating these moments where you're all sort of in on the same thing together.
I think, and one of the things, so we had a lexicographer on, Corey Stamper, who's awesome. My dad pointed out she was on Terry Gross 5 months after she was on our show, so Terry Gross is also biting my style. But she talked about actually, I mean, I think a lot of mashups are actually at the center, at the beginning of culture anyways, right? So she talked about how new language being put into dictionaries is actually so often mostly from gay culture or Black youth culture, right? So we've been talking to Tobin Lowe at Nancy about like, should maybe he could just tell us what he's doing now so that when we all copy it in 6 months, we'll be ahead of the curve. And I think so there's this idea of what we're doing and creating a community and knowing that we're in it together, you know, a common language, this idea of authenticity of voice. I mean, we've been defining a demographic in a lot of ways and curating and sharing, and that helps people feel heard and seen, and also like even our non-mashups who listen feel like they're in on something. So yeah.
Right. And KPCC has done a really good job of trying to sound like Los Angeles. Like the Los Angeles community, and now more Latinos are listening to you. Ashley, will you tell us how you did it and why it was worth it? Like, why should others try to do what you did?
I like the way you asked that because it sounds like I did it. So I would say that we have a board, we have a president who really sees as part of our mission that we're serving Southern California, and that the best, most effective way to do that is to reflect Southern California, and that starts with staffing. And we received a grant several years ago from CPB to hire more and more diverse talent, and to also shape a show that was meant to reflect and to attract a multi-ethnic audience. My watch just keeps ringing, so I'm so sorry. But when you're doing that, it means going outside of that norm and just being willing to go there. But it's very much a work in progress. It's about hiring diverse talent, investing in diverse talent, promoting them, and then also listening and being there's this idea that I try to put out there that listening is our superpower. So at KPCC, some of the ways that we do that are through Hearken, through Ground Source, through the Public Insight Network, and then just going out of our way to, again, be where people are.
And you hold an event called Unheard LA, and we're going to listen to a clip of it. And this is one of the ways that they connect with their audience and go out and embed themselves.
What's up, LA? I'm Bruce Lemon, host of Unheard LA, KPCC in person's new community-driven storytelling series.
Raised by blacks, schooled by whites. My mama was adopted, so I never felt right in my own skin.
We are not from the preconceived notions of where you think we are from.
We have 2 more live shows. This Sunday in downtown LA is already full, so join us for the live video stream and RSVP for our last show on May 13th out in Hollywood, kpcc.org/unheardla.
So tell us a little bit about Unheard LA.
So Unheard LA, I'm wearing a tattoo because I couldn't get it off my arm. That is from Unheard LA. It's a live storytelling series that we launched this spring, and it's completely community-driven. We did everything we could, again, to be outside of our building. We were in all of the branches of the LA Public Library. We were in different spaces saying, okay, share your story, whatever your story is, whatever platform your story's in, and we'll work with you. And we partnered with Bruce Lemon, who is an actor, a theater director, active in South LA, and we put together these 3 live shows throughout the area. And it was just incredibly powerful because, again, we got out of our way, and we had people talking about living in Southern California with mental illness, being a 14-year-old who can't stand social media, what it's like to we heard Jonathan Rios there talking about what it's like to be raised in one community with another community and trying to sort of navigate all of that. One of the things that we had talked about in our email exchanges is this, when you get down to it, people, like if you're at a party and your picture's taken, your picture's put up on social media or it's put in a magazine, you want to pick it up because you're suddenly seeing yourself somewhere you weren't before. And so the more that we can do that in our podcasts or on our air, the more you're going to get that investment. And I don't just mean actual party picture photos, but reflecting people. So one of the things that I'm proudest of with the Unheard LA series is that more than 80% of the people who RSVP'd had never RSVP'd to a KPCC event before. And that we do a lot of events, so that was a really cool metric for us to have.
Great. Christina, Merge has been around for a while, and you have stayed sort of a fringe record label forever when the indie scene can it sort of like dies off and comes back in different forms. So how have you done that? How have you maintained relevance and kept people interested in what you have to say?
Well, we're an artist-run label, and the basic philosophy is just working with artists and music that we love. And so if you take that and you just run it through every single communication, whether it's an email to a mail order customer or a tweet or whatever, we joke all the time that we're Merge, the label that hugs, because you have some labels are mean or funny, and we're not good at any of that. We're good at hugs.
Hugs?
Hugs, yeah. So I think that staying really consistent with that message, and also just understanding that sometimes staying who you are means you're not going to win everything. You're going to have an artist that outgrows you and leaves, and you have to be okay with that, even though it sucks. And you're going to also get to, by staying true to who you are, you will advance in that people are going to want to work with you, and they're going to stay with you because, we're honest and we tell the artists who we are, but also act more as a team member than a person that's like their boss, or, you know, certainly we don't have giant budgets or, you know, stripper parties or anything like that. So I think we've really lately, you know, as media has gotten really complicated and everybody's pivoting to video, have just doubled down on Merge and who we are, and being artist friendly, and being the label that you're going to get a direct email from. And so we're making fancier newsletters, and we're trying to do social media contests more, and trying to be present in independent record stores, because that's still base camp one for our artists, and at the level that we're able to
More
work
going
at.
to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. More going to them.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about growing diverse audiences with you, Rebecca. I think a lot of people are trying to reach new and younger and more diverse audiences, and make content directly for them, like Rebecca is doing. Do you think that this is happening in the right way?
So the first thing that I'd say is one of the things that we had Soledad O'Brien on the show, and she is brilliant, and she talked about this idea of being in a room and everyone's talking about Latino USA, Latino, they, and she's like, they is me. So like, who in the room, is it all theys? Is like, if you don't have anyone who can say us, me, like we have a problem. I actually just had a similar experience where someone said, you know, this sort of Columbusing of things, right? Like, we just discovered chopsticks. That really just happened on the internet recently. And I was like, they're a life hack. You can use them for cooking. You're like, oh, what? There are 1 billion people in just China who use, you didn't just know. So anyways, the idea is like, who is in the room with you, I think is important. So again, this idea of who we are, that's been a really critical piece, is that we're representing ourselves, but also being super intentional about the guests and the voices. Like, our affirmative action campaign this season is like actually age and accented voices. Like, that's what our parents sound like, that's what our grandparents sound like. And so like, why don't we have them on more? I mean, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't look like our lives, right? And I think we're all so happy when we actually see it. Look, those people are gonna subscribe. So like, you know, or Master of None, you get to see Aziz's parents. Like that, of course we're so thrilled because those are our parents. And so I think that's part of what it is thinking about what's missing from your own story to see reflected, like why you, Sarah, aren't feeling like you hear yourself or the things that you care about, or you're like being sold a version of yourself that you're not actually that interested in. Like, that's how I feel about anthropology sometimes. I'm like, don't sell me myself. So I think there's just, assume people are curious, that they want to be there, be very specific, be honest, find the through lines, and talk like yourself, talk in colloquial terms. That I don't know if that's answering the questions, but that's sort of what I've learned about this. I can't, you know, when people say, well, maybe you should try to reach more white people, and I'm like, but there's stuff for them, so I don't have to do that. And also they're welcome to be here. And I think we get some of the best love letters from like being like, I'm just a person in Idaho trying to stay woke. And I'm like, you know, and I love that person is there, and they're like sending me pictures of the bibimbap because they like found a Korean restaurant in Boise, and I'm like, that is so nice and awesome, and you are welcome, and we love it, and we'll talk about it, but we're telling our stories.
Yeah. And now, yeah. And before we wrap up, quickly, we have a minute left. I want to get to how we define success. Downloads don't always matter, but the reality is that they do kind of matter. So maybe, Rebecca, can you just tell us, like, I don't know if you want to share what some of your early downloads or clicks were, or how would you define success if you're starting out?
Well, like, let's just say our first episode had like 10,000 downloads, which actually, to be honest, the first 5 months we had our website, we had like 300 people on it, and it was mostly me because I didn't know how to filter out my own IP address. So, you know, and those are still big numbers, actually, I know, relative to myself, and it's grown. But I would say, like, my questions for you would be like, what kind of engagement do you have? How are the people who are listening engaging? You know, I know Too Beautiful to Live is a show that American Public Media also produces. They put something out every day. They don't have a ton of listeners, but they have deeply engaged listeners who will give money, who care deeply about them. So, and they're focused. They can be high focused. My other question is, do you need to be financially sustainable? Because you might not, I mean, we all do in our lives, but this may not be the place that you're doing that. You know, is this marketing for the rest of your company or your brand? Is this content marketing? That relieves some of the pressure of trying to figure out if you need to reach, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of people in order to make money on it. Or can you join a network to, you know, leverage the scale of many other shows? I mean, I think it's really something, we're all in this together, and there's still so much opportunity to grow, that you should be on each other's shows. How are you being mentioned? Who's talking about you? And having other people on your show within this world. And then finally, you know, thinking about how often are people listening? Again, is another measure of engagement. What do people care about? And obviously downloads are great, but ultimately that's actually, like everything about whether then you're selling ads on it. And if you're not doing that, there's other ways to engage.
Look at that. We're at exactly 0.
Sorry,
You know how to...
I talked a lot.
All right, so that's all for our panel. Thanks to our panelists. And next up is Start Your Clocks, 7 things you need to do to start a podcast. That's
That we'll stay for that.